Imagine being an average Somali girl with zero knowledge of the fashion industry, never having seen a fashion magazine, never worn heels, never even thought about modeling. And then your first job? It's for Vogue. Not just that you become one of the most in-demand models of all time. Yves Saint Laurent calls you his dream woman. Gianni Versace is obsessed with you. Calvin Klein, Mugler, Halston, they're all fighting to work with you. Sounds like a fairy tale, right?
Wrong!
Because if you think breaking into the industry as a model of color is hard now, honey, the 70s were a whole different beast. A man had to fight for everything. Representation, equal pay, basic respect, and not just against the system, even against other black models. Because here's the thing, IMAN wasn't just a black model. She was an outsider. She wasn't American. She wasn't part of the existing fashion cliques. And she sure as hell wasn't going to sit quietly and accept less than what she deserved. So how did she do it? How did a young Somali woman go from escaping a war to redefining the modeling industry? And why, at the peak of her success, did she say enough and walk away? Buckle up, because today we're diving into the rise, the rebellion, and the reality behind IMAN, the supermodel who changed everything. And before you think this is just another she was beautiful and talented story, think again. She had to negotiate her own value. She had to challenge an industry that didn't know what to do with her. She had to prove, over and over again, that she was more than just a trend. So, let's start at the beginning, and it's wild. You know how some people are just born to be legendary? Well, IMAN wasn't destined for greatness in the way you'd expect. Her path to legendary status was anything but ordinary. She wasn't the daughter of a fashion insider. She wasn't raised in Paris or New York, flipping through glossy magazines, dreaming of runways. No. IMAN's childhood looked very different. She was born Zahra Mohammed Abdulmajid in Somalia, a country where beauty wasn't a career path. It was just life. Her family, educated, well-off, respected. Her father was a diplomat, her mother a gynecologist. So yeah, this wasn't some rags to riches Cinderella story, but from the moment she arrived, she was different. First girl in 6 generations. Think about that, 6 generations of sons. So yeah, when she was born, it wasn't just a big deal. It was practically a miracle. Her grandfather believed her name would shape her destiny, so he renamed her IMAN, which means faith in Arabic. And spoiler alert, he wasn't wrong.
He knew!
But here's where it gets interesting. IMAN's childhood, not exactly stable. When she was just 4 years old, she was sent to boarding school in Egypt. And while most kids were learning the alphabet, IMAN was learning to adapt. Different languages, different cultures, different ways of thinking. Then, things got worse. Somalia erupted into political chaos. Her father had to move the family for their safety, and eventually they ended up in Kenya. By the time she was a teenager, she had already lived in multiple countries, spoke 5 languages, and had seen more of the world than most people do in a lifetime. But modeling? Nowhere on her radar. She wasn't spending her time practicing poses in the mirror. She was studying political science at the University of Nairobi, planning to change the world in a completely different way. And then, one random walk changed everything. Picture this. You're walking down the street, minding your business, when suddenly, some guy stops you and asks, "Have you ever been photographed?" Now let's be real. If this happened today, major red flags. But in 1975, IMAN wasn't impressed, and she definitely wasn't interested. That man? Peter Beard. If you don't know who Peter Beard is, just imagine the most obsessed with exotic beauty, art collecting, eccentric, rich white guy who spent his life traveling to Africa and photographing women like he was discovering rare birds. So he stops IMAN, expecting her to be flattered, and she's like, absolutely not. But Peter? Persistent. He doesn't back down. He tells her she should be a model, that he wants to take her pictures, that she has something special. And then he says, I'll pay you.
Well, why didn't you start with that?
Now, IMAN was a smart girl. She wasn't about to waste her time for nothing. So she throws out a number. $8,000. The exact amount she needed for 1 year of university tuition. And Peter didn't even hesitate. And just like that, her life changed forever. They met the next day. He took the pictures. She got her tuition. And as far as IMAN was concerned, that was it. But Peter, he had other plans. He took those photos straight to New York, showed them to every fashion editor and agency, and suddenly, the industry lost its mind. By the time she landed in the US, she was already the moment. But here's where things take a very interesting turn. Peter Beard didn't just introduce IMAN as a model. No, he spun an entire fairy tale. He told the press that IMAN was a Somali princess, a goat herder, discovered in the middle of the jungle. Mind you, Somalia is a desert. IMAN later said,
I was majoring in political science at the Nairobi University. That's where he met me. He took pictures of me, paid me, by the way, brought the pictures to the United States. And how he put it to the press was that he has discovered the most beautiful woman. He didn't say black. He said the most beautiful woman in the world. And I was a goat herder.
So was he trying to say that you were in the farm?
Yeah, or in the jungle. I don't know.
In the jungle.
Mind you, my father was an ambassador. I spoke 5 languages.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I've never seen a jungle.
But the fashion world ate it up. And before Iman could even blink, she was an overnight sensation. Now most models spend years grinding, building their portfolios, going to endless castings, getting rejected 100 times before they land a big gig. Not Iman. She had barely set foot in New York before Peter Beard threw her straight into the deep end. Literally hours after she landed, he held a press conference. Not a quiet little introduction, a full-blown media event. And the story? Oh, it was wild. Peter didn't just present Iman as a new model. No, he fed the press the entire fairy tale, the Somali princess, the jungle discovery, the exotic mystery of it all. And the industry? They ate it up. Just like that, she started at the top. No slow climb. No hustling for small-time gigs. She was already a sensation before she even booked a single job. And her first photo assignment? Straight to the big leagues. Photographed by Francesco Scavullo, one of the most iconic photographers of the time, for Vogue, not some small editorial. And within days, she wasn't just in front of the camera, she was on the runway. Her first catwalk? Halston, not as a background model, as a celebrity guest. Let's be clear, nobody starts their career like this. Most models wait years to walk for Halston. Iman did it within days of landing in New York. She wasn't just a model, she was a moment. A rare, untouchable, once-in-a-generation kind of star. And the industry couldn't get enough. But here's where it gets complicated. People actually believed she didn't speak English. That whole exotic discovery story, yeah, it worked a little too well. People would literally talk about her right in front of her, assuming she wouldn't understand a word they were saying. And what they said? Brutal. Fashion executives, designers, casting agents, they'd comment on her looks, her presence, her exotic appeal, in the most dehumanizing ways, as if she wasn't even in the room. Then came the day she walked into Stephen Burrows' showroom. Stephen Burrows, one of the few black designers at the time, had invited her over. She walked in, and of course, the models were already there. And the moment they saw her, the whispers started. And Iman? She stood there smiling, pretending she didn't understand a word. And then the real problem started. Stephen handed her a dress and a pair of heels, expecting her to put them on. But there was one problem. Iman had never worn heels before. She tried, and failed. She couldn't even get her foot into the shoe. The other models? They just stood there, watching, waiting, smirking. Except for one person, Beth Ann Hardison. Beth Ann didn't say a word. She just walked over, bent down, and helped Iman into her shoes.
And then one day, Stephen Burrows, black designer, invited me to come to his showroom. So I went there, models were there. They started talking in front of me. Everybody said, well, she's not as beautiful as they said she is. Well, she's not as tall as they said she is. Well, do you think she's a princess or is she a good herder? Which one do you think she is? And I pretended, of course, I didn't understand what they were saying. And then so Stephen came, gave me the dress, gave me heels. I put on the dress, and for the life of me, I could not put the heels on.
And I noticed she was trembling so much. So I went over to her and bent down to help her foot into the shoe.
And all the girls in the room, they said, oh, don't do Beth Ann that. Now she's going to be thinking that we have to bow to her and do this for her. And Beth Ann didn't pay any attention to them.
And something told me she spoke English, and looked up at her and said, you understand everything they're saying? And she looked at me and she said, yes. And that was our bond.
And she became my closest friend from that day till today. We've been through everything. She's been the maid of honor of my wedding. She is the godmother of my daughter. We've been through divorces, businesses, you name it, we've been through it together.
And from that moment on, Iman wasn't just another new model anymore. She was a force. She started booking cover after cover. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle. She became the face of high fashion. Designers didn't just want her, they needed her. But here's the thing. It wasn't just her beauty that made her unforgettable. It was the way she moved. Most models walked the runway like they were marching, stiff, robotic, predictable. But Iman, she floated. Her walk was smooth, effortless, and almost hypnotic. She didn't stomp, she glided. Her presence was so powerful that even standing still, she commanded the entire room. It wasn't just a walk, it was a signature. And it made designers obsessed. Gianni Versace couldn't get enough. Thierry Mugler, completely captivated. Halston, constantly calling, but no designer worshipped her quite like Yves Saint Laurent. YSL didn't just dress Iman, he built an entire collection around her. It was called the African Queen. A bold, unapologetic, regal collection inspired by her elegance, her power, and her heritage. At a time when black models were barely given space on runways, Iman had one of the most influential designers in the world, creating an entire line in her honor. That's not just modeling, that's legacy. But while Iman was dominating the fashion world, there was still one thing she wasn't getting: equal pay. Let's talk about what the fashion world didn't want you to know. Black models were paid less than white models. Same jobs, same runways, same campaigns, different paychecks. A white model could book the exact same job as a black model and walk away with a much bigger check. And Iman? She wasn't about to accept that. So she made a move no one saw coming. She went on strike. 3 months, no shoots, no runway shows, no magazine covers. She refused to work until she was paid the same as her white counterparts. 3 months of saying no. Back then, that was unheard of. Most models, especially black models, didn't have the luxury to say no. The industry kept them grateful, not powerful. But Iman, she wasn't just another model anymore. She was too big, too influential, and too valuable to ignore. And guess what? It worked. She became one of the first black models to demand and receive equal pay. She didn't just make history, she changed the game. And once she got what she deserved, she set her sights on something even bigger. Because here's the thing, walking the biggest runways and gracing the covers of Vogue is great, but if you want real money in modeling, you need a beauty contract. That's where the millions are. Fashion pays well, cosmetics pay generational wealth, and for decades, beauty brands refused to sign black models. The excuse? There's no market for dark skin. Black women don't buy high-end cosmetics. It won't sell. Lies. All lies.
It was all a lie. Guys, it was all a lie. She lied.
And the worst part? It wasn't just about contracts. Even when Iman was one of the most in-demand models in the world, makeup artists still didn't know what to do with her. Or worse, they didn't even try. Makeup artists would look at her and ask, "Did you bring your own foundation?" Some wouldn't even attempt to match her skin tone. They'd just skip her altogether. They were trained to work with white models, and anyone outside that standard, not their problem. And this wasn't just Iman's experience. It kept happening for decades. Even in the 90s, models like Yasmin Gowri, who had South Asian heritage, had to do her own makeup because artists still weren't equipped or willing to work with non-white skin tones. So imagine how much worse it was in the 70s. Think about that. You're booked for a high-end fashion show, sitting next to models who are being perfectly prepped and polished, and you're expected to do your own makeup. Iman had had enough. She wasn't just going to be the token black model in the industry. She was going to break the system. She fought for a seat at the table. She refused to accept no. And then, she got the deal. She became the first woman of color to land a major cosmetics contract, with Revlon. That deal didn't just change her life. It forced the entire industry to wake up. It proved that black women were a market. It forced brands to expand their shade ranges. It paved the way for every black beauty contract that came after. No Revlon deal, no Fenty Beauty, no Pat McGrath Labs, no inclusivity in makeup. Iman did that. But here's the real flex. Years later, when she still couldn't find a brand that truly catered to black and brown skin tones, she built her own. IMAN Cosmetics, a brand specifically made for women of color, a multi-million-dollar empire. She went from being ignored by the industry to owning part of it. And at this point, she wasn't just a model. She was a businesswoman, a power player, a legend. But even after achieving everything, there was one more chapter to be written, and it was about love.
This is my favorite part.
Now let's talk about Iman's personal life, because trust me, it's just as fascinating as her career. Before she was the world's most in-demand model, before she became an international beauty mogul, before she was the wife of a rock legend. She was a young woman navigating love for the first time. At just 18 years old, she married a Somali businessman who was an executive at the Hilton Hotel. But here's the thing. Iman was never meant for a traditional life. She was young. She was ambitious. So, when the opportunity to move to the U.S. for modeling came knocking, she took it. And just like that, her first marriage ended. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't dramatic. It was just over. At the height of her modeling career, Iman's second marriage was to American basketball superstar Spencer Haywood, and on paper, it looked like a match made in heaven. She was one of the most famous models in the world. He was a dominant force in the NBA. Together, they were the definition of a power couple. They got married in 1977 and had a daughter, Zuleika Haywood, in 1978. But behind the picture-perfect life, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. The marriage faced tension, struggles, and the weight of two powerful careers moving in different directions. By 1987, it was over. Another chapter closed. And then, there was David Bowie. Now this was a love story. It all started with a blind date. Hairdresser Teddy Antolin invited Iman to a party in 1990. But when she arrived, it wasn't some big social event. It was an intimate dinner with just 4 people. One of them, David Bowie. And Bowie, from the moment he saw her, he was hooked. He later said, "I couldn't sleep after the night I met her." He was absolutely smitten. And when Iman left that night, Bowie did what any man hopelessly in love would do. He made sure he saw her again. The very next day, he invited her to tea. But here's the thing. Bowie didn't even drink tea, so they ended up at a coffee shop instead.
I think I did something really corny the next day. I think I invited her to, I think probably afternoon tea somewhere in LA.
When I picked him up from his hotel to go to tea, then he told me he was so nervous he just said tea. He doesn't drink tea. He never drinks tea. He had coffee.
And from that moment on, they were inseparable. Bowie didn't just love Iman, he adored her. She wasn't just his wife, she was his muse, his inspiration, his world. He even wrote a song for her, Abdul Majid, a tribute to her elegance and strength. And later, composer Philip Glass transformed it into a symphony, immortalizing their love through music. But if there was ever a moment that proved Bowie's devotion, it was the ring. 2 years before they got engaged, while in Florence, Italy, Iman spotted a ring at a small inn boutique. She loved it, but she didn't buy it. Most people would have let that memory fade. Not Bowie. When the time came to propose, he tracked that exact ring down. He found out someone else had already bought it. So what did he do? He found the buyer, bought it off them, and then proposed. Because when Bowie wanted something for Iman, nothing was out of reach. That wasn't just love. That was devotion. By 1992, they got married in a private ceremony in Switzerland, followed by a grand wedding in Florence, Italy. And this wasn't just a celebrity marriage. This was real. No scandals, no cheating rumors, no drama, just love. They became one of the most iconic power couples of all time. A rock legend and a supermodel, both untouchable in their own right, but together, unstoppable. In 2000, they welcomed their daughter, Alexandria Zara Jones. And for the first time, Iman stepped away from the spotlight. She had spent years breaking barriers, making history, and building an empire. But now, she just wanted to be a wife and a mother. For the next decade, they built a life that wasn't about red carpets and flashing cameras. It was about love, family, and privacy. And then, everything changed. In 2016, David Bowie passed away after a private battle with cancer. And Iman? She disappeared from the public eye. She wasn't just mourning a husband, she was mourning her soulmate. She later said, "I will never remarry. He was my true love." The love of her life was gone. For years, she stayed away from the spotlight, focusing on healing, her family, and her legacy. But here's the thing about Iman. She has always been more than her losses. She is a survivor, a pioneer, a woman who redefines herself over and over again. And even after everything she's been through, her story isn't over. You'd think after decades of breaking barriers, demanding change, and building an empire, Iman would sit back and enjoy her legacy. But if you know Iman, you know she's never been one to stay silent. Even today, she is still fighting against racism in the fashion industry. Because while things have improved, the reality, we are far from where we need to be. For years, fashion pretended to be inclusive. They'd put one black model on a magazine cover and call it progress. They'd sprinkle a few non-white models onto a runway and pat themselves on the back. They acted like diversity was a trend rather than a necessity. And Iman? She was not having it. She has called out the fashion industry's performative activism time and time again. She openly criticized brands that tokenize black models for PR points, but refuse to hire them behind the scenes. She slammed luxury labels that book black models once for diversity, but don't sign them for major campaigns. And she has made it very clear, representation is not enough. There needs to be power behind it, and she's not just talking, she's doing something about it. IMAN is taking her fight to a whole new level by using her platform to tell the stories that the fashion industry has tried to ignore. She was the executive producer of a 6-part documentary called Supreme Models, the story of iconic black women who revolutionized fashion. Inspired by Marcella Reynolds' book of the same title, the documentary pays tribute to the black women who broke down barriers and transformed the fashion and beauty industry for everyone. It highlights the struggles, victories, and impact of black models who changed the face of fashion forever. Because fashion history isn't complete without black women, and Iman isn't fighting this battle alone. She's teaming up with Naomi Campbell and Bethan Hardison to take the fight public. They're part of the Diversity Coalition, a group demanding real change in the industry, and for the first time, they're calling out designers by name. In an open letter to the governing bodies of Fashion Week, they exposed the industry's racism. They named brands like Calvin Klein, Donna Karan, Armani, and many others for using just one or no models of color in their fall shows, while hiring dozens of white models. They didn't just suggest it was discrimination. They called it a racist act. And the industry couldn't ignore them anymore, because when 3 of the most powerful black women in fashion unite and demand change, the industry has no choice but to listen. Let's be real. The industry listens to Iman because they have to. She isn't just an ex-supermodel. She is a businesswoman. She is a cultural icon. She is one of the most respected voices in fashion. And when Iman speaks, people listen. When she calls out racism in fashion, headlines are made. When she demands change, brands scramble to fix their mistakes. When she pushes for inclusion, real conversations start happening. Because Iman doesn't just talk, she forces action.
One of the designers was a woman called Philo, who did Celine. Every woman, black, white, every age that I know of, coveted Celine bags. Mm-hmm. It was always, waitlist.
Those bags.
And so Philo said, am I going to be forced to use black? She's never used black models. So she said, am I going to be forced to use black models? I said, no. I mean, there's got to be the right black model for you. There can't be no black model that's not right for you. And but just by she saying that, I said, and I did this because I've done it, but I never said it, publicly. I said, for the action of she saying that she has to have the choice not to use black models, that's why I have never bought a Celine bag.
Oh,
Wow.
She has the right to her runway, and I have a right to my pocketbook.
Absolutely.
So so I never owned a Celine bag for that. That's what I mean by boycott. It's like there's lots of bags that I can own. I don't need a Celine bag.
Yeah.
Especially if she feels nothing for me.
Yes.
Even after decades in the industry, Iman isn't bitter. She is hopeful. She believes in the power of young models and creators to keep pushing boundaries. She sees the rise of black designers, executives, and creatives making their own space. She knows that the fight she started is being carried on. And that is her legacy. She once said, "It's not about being the first. It's about making sure you're not the last." And that's exactly what she's done. Iman didn't just change fashion. She changed what was possible for every black woman who came after her, and she's still not done. And that's the tea on Iman, an absolute icon who broke barriers and made the fashion world catch up. But real talk, has the industry actually changed? Or are they just slapping diversity on a campaign and calling it a day? Let me know what you think. All right, that's it from me. Stay gossipy, stay messy, and I'll catch you in the next one.